changing your life one story at a time. This is the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast with Editor-in-Chief Amy Newmark.
Hey, it's Amy Newmark with your daily dose of Chicken Soup for the Soul inspiration. It's Wow Wednesday, and we're approaching Memorial Day weekend. So I'm going to tell you a story about a young military bride. Now let me start by saying that we get tons of fan mail from our readers. They tell us how a story or book has affected their lives. And there's one letter in particular that stands out for me and makes all the work that I do worthwhile. On the night of April 12th, 2011, we got an email from a 20-year-old woman, newly married, a military wife, named Tracy Fitzgerald. She'd been a big fan of the Chicken Soup for the Teenage Soul books, so when she heard that we had a book called Chicken Soup for the Military Wife's Soul, she rushed out to buy it. Tracy's husband, Griffin, was in the Army, and he had been deployed to Afghanistan for a 12-month tour 1 month earlier. They were expecting their first child, a girl, in July, but Griffin had signed up for this 12-month tour even though it was his second tour of duty because he felt very strongly about serving in Afghanistan. So Griffin had only been away for 2 weeks when Tracy started reading Chicken Soup for the Military Wife's Soul. She read a story every night leading up to the night of April 11th. And that night, she read a story from that book for military wives, and it was called Newfound Heroes. It was by Carol Howard. And Tracy explains this in her email, and here's what she said. It's a story about a military wife like me who got a call from her husband while he was deployed because he had been shot and seriously injured. While reading the story, I kept stopping to think about how I would react if I received a similar phone call. When I read that despite his injuries, her husband could still walk, I wondered what we would do if my husband called to say that he had lost his legs. I thought about how we would manage, how difficult it would be, how our lives would change. But then she started imagining a bright future, too, and she continued in her email to say, I imagined the two of us with our little girl, only she was about 5, and playing at the beach. My husband and I were holding hands and smiling. Everything was okay, and it didn't seem so different after all. I told myself that no matter what, things would be okay. So after Tracy finished reading that story and imagining what she would do if her husband lost his legs in Afghanistan, she fell asleep, and she was jolted awake early the next morning by a phone call from her husband, that phone call that no military wife wants to receive. She hadn't heard from Griffin for a week, so she was relieved to hear his voice until he fell silent and then said, I'm coming home. Tracy was happy but confused. Was the Army sending the troops home early? Why, she asked. And then Griffin said, I've been hit by an IED. The bomb had blown off Griffin's right leg from the knee down, his ring finger on his right hand, the tip of his right pinky, and had also caused multiple shrapnel wounds. Tracy cried, but she held it together as much as she could for Griffin. It was only after she hung up that she realized she had prepared for this very phone call the night before when she read that Chicken Soup for the Soul story. Tracy wrote to us and said, reading that story in Chicken Soup for the Military Wife's Soul gave me the foresight I needed. It gave me the strength to see the big picture. It prepared me for what was to come without knowing it. I don't know how I would have reacted had I not read Newfound Heroes and thought about being in a similar situation the night before my husband's call. So that was pretty amazing, and that email from Tracy made the rounds in our office and caused quite a stir. If we could help someone like Tracy transform heartbreak into strength and a new perspective, we were doing something right. And we ended up publishing Tracy's story and the story that she had read from our book for military wives in a new book that we made called Chicken Soup for the Soul, Reader's Choice. Now, tomorrow is Thoughtful Thursday, and with Memorial Day weekend coming right up, I'm going to share a couple of stories that will motivate you to unplug your devices for the weekend and reconnect with the people you love, living, breathing people. I'm Amy Newmark. Thank you for listening to the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast today. Please pass the podcast along to your friends and family and tell them how to listen to a podcast. And if you'd like to read more classic favorite stories from the books I mentioned today, Chicken Soup for the Soul, Reader's Choice, or Chicken Soup for the Military Wife's Soul, please go to our website, chickensoup.com.